Alex Answer here on this 30th day of July 2016, here with Kyle Reardon. And in this podcast, we're going to be discussing the cognitive impairment of not only today's researcher, but I would say society in general. I mean, we're seeing a lot of situations in which we're seeing poor judgment used and a real lack of logic and reason. And this really encompasses a lot of the topics we've already addressed, regarding the co-opting of the liberty movement and so many things. So we're going to cover a lot of dots. Kyle, what are some of the things that you want to bring up first?
Well, I think what I want to bring up first is just quite simply that I do think, honestly, that there is some degree of cognitive impairment, which may very well be exacerbated by other factors, but I think it is rather naive to not say that there is no cognitive impairment. And when you combine it, anyone really the dumbing down in the government schools, which many people in the alternative media are very, very well familiar with, then I think this would further explain why this odd phenomenon that you and I have been podcasting about, that perhaps there is something going on in people's brains, literally, in terms of like the neurons not firing correctly or something to that effect.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a mental health issue. And we're not going to wait till the end to talk about, basic health and solutions. And it's not like any of us are perfect. But I think that, going from a society that at one time read books to then getting and consuming and spending a great deal of time on the internet and in front of a computer, combined with, in particular for those that are researchers of conspiracies and independently minded libertarians, the isolation itself from the world that we live in, being that, we could be in a society where we're the only ones, right? They're thinking about certain things of a liberty-oriented nature. And I think that has a psychological effect. Now, so the technological overdose upon this society as a whole is a much larger topic. But we can hit on some small recent examples. For example, there's a local story where they sent out search and rescue for two girls that got lost while playing, drumroll, Pokemon Go. And it's disturbing because we're seeing this trend with the addition to technology affecting society to where, it's, and it's ridiculous. Yes, the police can pull people over if people are seen texting while they're driving. But the police can do it. That's just one of my issues that's just really insane about this society, idiocracy society. So are the police taking some sort of a special course to where they're better at using their phone while driving? But that aside, for people to be screaming for years, and we've talked about these in the Trump podcasts, about vote fraud and electoral fraud, and then to be putting a large percentage of their psychological energy into the coming election and not see it this as a literal waste of their human energy, thought, creativity. And there's obvious cognitive impairment if more people aren't having the same discussion that we're having. Not that we have all the answers, but we're certainly not the only people that are noticing that there's a big distraction taking place. I'm not for Hillary. This is ridiculous. The dumbing down of the so-called aspects, members of the liberty movement, to think that if you're against Trump, that you are somehow for Hillary. I'm going to pause right there because this knee-jerk talking point is a sign of mental illness and nothing short of that. Because it's basically saying that there is no independent thought out there. You're either this or this. You're either going to have a Pepsi or you're going to have a Coke. This is 2016. I'm not a big believer in the New Age consciousness shift in, the collective of the human species. But this is really regression. It's transgression of thought to continue to try to force people in this left or right paradigm.
Well, I mean, speaking about that left-right paradigm, I remember asking you in a previous podcast you and I did about, would it be fair to say that the left-right paradigm has resurged with a vengeance? And, I remember back during the George W. Bush years where it was not at all uncommon to have like a third position, whether the third position was libertarian or the third position was just something else, not part of the authoritarian right or the authoritarian left. And now, if anybody even tries to broach a third position of any kind, or even just being, what some people would call a moderate or a centrist, they're vilified. The polarization is really quite. It almost seems, I hate to say this, but it's almost as if the establishment is winning, at least during this particular phase. And who knows, Alex, maybe the next phase will show something else, but I think the Hillary versus Trump matchup in a lot of ways is a lot more volatile than, say, I don't know, 2000 or 2004 or 2008, even 2012, any of those electoral cycles with those different puppets and so forth. And it's interesting, too, you brought up the the vote fraud, right? Because there's that documentary called Hacking Democracy, which came out during the Bush years, where, there's the old adage about presidents are selected, not elected. And, much like you said, there were a lot of folks in the alternative media, the content producers, the same ones who would be reminding everybody of Bev Harris and her organization's work on the electronic vote fraud, which was black box voting, are now a lot of them, not all of course, but a lot of them are now supporting Trump. So it's like, wait a minute, you guys have the least excuse of anybody else because you actually know you've taken a peek behind the curtain. So yeah, I do think there's definitely some sort of cognitive impairment. I know some other people have mentioned their theories or guesses or speculation that maybe it's more of an emotional issue. I don't know, Alex. I personally think the neurons are not firing anymore. Who knows? Maybe the fluoride in the water's gotten to them. I hate to say.
Yeah, or there's a number of things that we can look at. But continuing on, there's another point that I'm going to bring up. And from being involved in the alternative media, I've met my fair share of people that have said, the people that are out there speaking about these things, if they're still alive and allowed to do what they're doing, they're obviously a part of the Illuminati. And I've seen people repeat and repeat that particular mantra. And I've seen others go in the direction of fear, because that is the unfortunate side effect that can happen to some people that, for lack of a better word or phrase, ungrounded. They can get really caught up and, even personalize some of the stuff as if they themselves would be kidnapped or abducted or put into a FEMA camp if they were to start a website. And I think it's important and it's not that, there aren't threats out there and that we couldn't see still some things in the future. But the written word is powerful, and it's things like that that stand the test of time. And so I think that people get really caught up in these knee-jerk patterns of thinking. For example, I've come across my fair share of people that have said to me that there's no point in discussing anything. There's no value in the spoken word. All that's real, all that's important, all that changes things is guns and violence and revolution. As if things are so simple. And so the knee-jerk reactions, the reactive thinking, seems to lack the logic and reason that we need to actually weather the storms that we're in today.
Well, yeah, I completely agree with you about that. It's interesting you mention about the knee-jerk reaction towards having a so-called revolution of one kind or another. It's rather interesting. If people had a childhood where, or maybe not a childhood, but they had an upbringing where they were actually trained like competently in terms of how to use force and do it in an ethical manner, then that could be a pragmatic possibility perhaps in an alternate dimension. But the fact of the matter is that that's not the case here. Most people haven't even done something as basic as hunting. And that doesn't even involve killing a human. That involves killing an animal usually, or even fishing. Even that doesn't even require a firearm. So I mean, there's so many steps removed that I think you're onto something. That cognitive impairment, I think, is kind of obvious once people just kind of start looking at the underlying assumptions here. It's almost like a bunch of folks who never had to use any form of self-defense, whether it's in a context of a mugging or a crime or something, are suddenly saying I want to be a revolutionary almost, and it's like, really? That would be like somebody who's not a brain surgeon but a drunk saying like, you know what, I never went to medical school, I don't know anything about human anatomy, but give me a six-pack and a scalpel and I'm motivated.
Well, that sounds like a lot of the internet armchair survivalists that are acting like they have all the answers. And some of the books out there are decent. I think it's good that if someone's wanting to go off grid and wanting to learn, to educate yourself on a variety of perspectives on how they do it. But, we live in the era of the man that knows it all on YouTube, and there is some decent stuff that's out there. Then there's some of the individuals that I've met that are all about domination and control. Really, I think out of fear, because they want their own clan, they want their own army, they want their own militia, because they themselves on their own actually, they don't have what it takes to actually weather certain situations. And then you have the rhetoric. Whoa, my guns will, that's my number one go-to for surviving. And people are proud to say that. And, I would be embarrassed to say it, I'm solely reliant on my guns. And, back when people were first starting to talk about the collapse and the potential of collapse, I've heard people, I'm sure you've heard them say it as well, well, I'll just go to my neighbors. And when I hear people joke about looting their neighbors for food, instead of just paying attention to the writing on the wall and being self-sufficient, whether you're going to grow food or store a little bit of food or whatever, or hunt or raise animals, to me, it's not manly to joke about robbing your neighbors. And it's also not looking at the picture if you're just being afraid of being robbed by your neighbors. And all you think about, if I go off grid, all these horrible things are going to happen. There's a lot of fear out there. So I think that the sedentary lifestyle, going back to technology and how much it's penetrated, how many hours of our day and how many hours people are sitting in front of the screen. I think it's important for people to go out and exercise and think about their diet and change up their environment, not stay stuck in the same place or the same job, thinking about going off grid tomorrow or surviving tomorrow or running this place. But, I don't want to sound like this is like some self-help lecture, but, it does kind of encompass that in reality. There's got to be some positive thinking that we bring into our lives. That's not necessarily new age. I'm not trying to bash, but that's based in reason and logic, that the body responds to positive thoughts and the body responds to negative thoughts. So if we're taking in a vast amount of negative news combined with some of it being fake, which is our next point, you have a problem. That fake news that's out there, which we did a podcast about, and we'll continue to talk about it, and I've mentioned it as ad nauseum. I wish more people were concerned. It's there to pull people in. They're concerned about certain issues and the potential, say, for example, that the government might microchip the population. But if someone doesn't have the inquisitive nature to see if there's a source for that claim, that in the year 2016 there would be mandatory microchips. And this was a trending fake news headline last year and the year before. Because it works if it's just like a year out or 2 years out. People are like, ooh, and then all of a sudden it's the top of beforeitsnews.com. But is it real? No. Is it trending? Oh, yes, it was. Just like that last story in 2013, in October, about the potential Russian invasion at that time. And all this does is really muddy the waters to the real potential Russian threats or other threats. When there's fake news that's mimicking real news, you have a problem. So this is kind of a two-pronged discussion I'm having with you, Kyle, because people should want to check out the source and find out if it's real. On the other hand, it's like there's cognitive impairment when information's put out there, say, warning people about Bruce Doucette. And certain people don't want to follow the clues and go, this guy actually has a track record, and will sit there and go to bat for this fool because they don't want to click on the link and see the actual source. They don't actually want to follow the story as to what's actually been documented about Bruce Doucette. So whether someone wants to believe in something or doesn't want to believe in something, a headline that they see, doesn't matter. The truth is what we should all want. And there's simple ways to finding out whether a story is real or not. And I think that people listening to this, if they've been caught up with some of this stuff, like the $1 trillion lawsuit, the bankers about to be arrested, they need to put aside their hopes and fears and recenter their compass on the truth. At least put out their intention and see where the rest goes.
Yeah, and I think the role of conspicuous consumption or corporate consumerism, for those who may prefer that term, I think plays a more important role than not when it comes to the cognitive impairment. If people are used to being like mindless consumer drones and they're not used to seriously thinking things through and more importantly, taking the initiative and, tracing back sources or tracing back leads back to the original source, then of course they're going to engage in, at minimum, they're going to engage in shallow thinking, which I would separately think that the news cycle in general encourages, but not everybody does that, because the news is only good in terms of telling you, like, current events, right? Like, these things happen, they're supposed to be the 5 W's and so forth. However, there are those of us who, like, study history and, like, the more underlying processes of how the establishment works. And so the news can kind of be more supplemental in a lot of ways in terms of, like, here's the latest thing that happened. But yes, you're right. That the news cycle now is now twisted in another way. It's not just the sensationalism; it is also the fake news as well. So I guess the point I think we're kind of rotating around here is that the cognitive impairment is also indicative of a lack of ability to perform intelligence analysis. Like if you're like an intelligence officer. And that was the old term for a spy, by the way. But yeah, if you're like an intelligence analyst and you're looking at like open source intelligence, not anything classified, and you're looking at a lot of different things. You're looking at manuals, you're looking at news reports, you're looking at a lot of different things. The question is like, okay, now you have all this information. Some of it may be true, some of it may not be, but then how do you make sense of it? And if somebody isn't rooted in having a good logical mind that can rationally kind of discern, like, okay, these two bits contradict each other. Maybe I can find another bit of information that can verify or debunk this other claim or whatever. If people are not even used to doing that, then of course they're going to fall for the Donald Trumps of the world and making America allegedly great again and pick your latest propaganda slogans, of the week.
I got one for you. That's like a perfect example, follow-up to what you're discussing. So we have a flat earth movement that is growing more rapidly than a simple, let's look with logic and reason at the patterns regarding the solar influence over human affairs. And you don't have to get supernatural with it. There are patterns, and so it's like this phrase pattern recognition came to me years ago because that's what excited me about the topic itself. All the patterns, it's really quite beautiful that, that can be found regarding all these aspects of human activity, from migration patterns, to the wars, to the large-scale demonstrations and protests, civil unrest and manufactured civil unrest. It's, it boggles the mind at people's inability to see those simple patterns, but then get steered into a hypothesis about the flat earth. Not so much whether or not we're in a holographic reality, which some scientists have actually addressed. In New Scientist magazine and others, are we in some sort of a quantum reality? And there's been studies upon studies. To me, that's much more interesting than something that it's like a dog chasing its tail. And I don't know how many flat earthers you've come across. It seems to kind of have died down because we see these fads rise, whether it be fake news or just extreme distraction, hypothesis, dog chasing its tail. The stories keep changing every few months. It's like there's a cycle. And it's like people are getting so caught up in the cycles within the cycles that they're not seeing like the chain of events here. Like, wait a minute, take a step back, take another look. Oh my God, there's a bunch of distractions here.
Yeah, that does seem to be the case. And actually, something that I did want to mention, I just thought of this, and it actually, I think, really is relevant to the cognitive impairment you and I are discussing, is the notorious role of patriot mythology. You have people in the patriot community who believe in this mythology, and it doesn't matter which one we're talking about. I even did a separate series with Gary Hunt, a 5-part series where we literally went through all of the claims painfully, line by line, hours and hours of audio, where we listed the documents, made available for linking and downloading and all that, and it didn't matter whether it was the corporate United States myth, which the sovereign citizens based their ideology on wholesale, or the America is still a British colony because of the Vatican for some inexplicable reason myth, or any of these other ones. Hell, heck, even the Philadelphia conspiracy, which is not true and was actually based in part on what was mentioned in a fictional novel, and even the author said this is fiction, and then people took it as fact, and that was a couple decades ago. It didn't matter which any of these patriot mythologies were; people just started believing they were true. And then when some other folks came along, and of course me being one of the latest ones, and it's like, hey, this is mythology, there's no evidence to this, suddenly you're a bad person. Hell, I've even been called a government agent more than once. And so, yeah, actually you were mentioning a little bit ago about...
So it's religious zeal. You're the devil, and, Bruce Messiah, Bruce Doucette the Messiah, Bruce Messiah Doucette.
He's telling, look,
literally is playing that role.
Yes, and the people who promote the patriot mythology, including Doucette, but certainly not limited to him, is that they tell people what they want to hear. And having said that, that would probably explain, and for those who don't know, Ryan Bundy, this is basically late breaking news, by the way, and I double checked this and I saw the documents, it's all real as far as I can tell, because there's like lots of paperwork that came out, but apparently according to Arnold Law Firm, Ryan Bundy has now officially declared himself to be a sovereign citizen, and it's in the court paperwork for the pretrial court hearings and so forth. And so, yeah, that's not going too well for at least that one Bundy brother. So he's a sovereign citizen now, supposedly, all these months later. And, it's actually interesting, speaking about the sovereign citizens and actually the fake judges just for a moment, Alex, I remember, and I documented this on my blog and linked it back to the original sources, but the fake judge Anna von Reitz, she accused me of a lot of things, but one of them, and I think that's relevant here, is that she accused me of being in league with John Duresh, who's the figurehead for the National Liberty Alliance, the NLA, and it apparently didn't matter to her that I had already done a couple podcasts and special, episodes of LUA Radio with Shane Radliff, where both of us were saying both the NLA and the fake judges are all sovereign citizens and promoting patriot mythology, and then we just went through the evidence. Apparently it doesn't matter. And so I think this is also indicative of the cognitive impairment too, that even when you have documents and pictures, actually, if you remember, Alex, there was that interview that G. Edward Griffin did with that former KGB agent. I don't remember his name, it was Yuri something. And the former KGB agent said something to the effect of, when you have a demoralized society, it doesn't matter if you show them pictures and documents or if you drag somebody by force and show them the internment camps. They will not believe you. And that interview was done back in the 80s or 70s or thereabouts. And I don't know, perhaps Yuri, the ex-KGB agent, has been proven right, at least to some degree. And it certainly would explain why oxymoronic, I think disingenuous activists like the sovereign citizens, or my personal favorite are the anarchist politicians, equally oxymoronic, are as popular as they are. So yeah, I think these are just different examples, different types of case studies we can see littered throughout the alternative media where, yeah, I think there is absolutely cognitive impairment. And, I would like to think that that homeschooling might be used to at least prevent that or at least mitigate it for the next generation of podcasters and videographers and bloggers, one of whom would be Nick Hazelton and others who are really the next generation of content producers in the alternative media. But I don't know. I mean, I would like to think that there are things that can be done now to try and curb the cognitive impairment as it is today.
Yeah, and another note, on a brief note, do you think there's somewhat of living consciousness that can be seen in society where aspects of society are in the alternative media, consumers and creators, are on one direction, still in this mode mentality of hierarchy and needing leaders and putting it's almost a part of our cellular memory. Through all the history, our ancestors and kingdoms, it's like they're sticking with some sort of a program. And then it seems like others across the spectrum want to evolve beyond that limited paradigm. And I also want to go back, we were talking about propaganda in the media and the cognitive impairment on the part of society to recognize certain patterns, to pick up on certain, clues. One of the things that I've been noticing is this very popular false argument that the establishment media hates Trump. I have a whole different interpretation of what I've seen. And when I see the same guy on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and constantly what Trump is saying on Twitter, I'm not seeing an establishment trying to censor or cover up what someone's saying. I'm seeing them pushing the narrative. This is what Trump is saying. This is what he's doing. And I'm not convinced Hillary is the New World Order's pick. I could see the establishment bringing Trump in for the intended purpose, one of many, not to mention World War III, but to trigger massive civil unrest in the United States. But going back, when you see certain media figureheads, people like Bill O'Reilly and others, people that, normally we wouldn't trust, people that we would associate to be pro-war, pro-torture, pro-death, pro-New World Order. Now, when those guys are already kind of placated as, the main men or liars, or not so much O'Reilly, but maybe other individuals, and then make statements about being afraid of Trump. To me, I see how that's really popularized, the Trump movement. Like, well, all these people are against Trump. Clearly, he's not their pick. Clearly, these people don't like this guy. And, it seems to be a really advanced form of reverse psychology, propaganda being used in the mainstream media. But I think that's what we're seeing.
Well, yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's almost like there is this eternal forgetting, this constant erasure of the past. This, because heck, I even had a private conversation with a lady patriot just the other night, Alex, and she didn't even know how the Electoral College worked. And because she was basically, okay, you'll love this. I won't say who it is, but I think you'll love this, and I think this will kind of point out a few things about cognitive impairment. She basically told me that the Patriots have to vote for Trump, not necessarily because Trump's a good guy and is going to, restore the Republic or whatever, but because Hillary is so much worse. And then I told her, wait a minute, the popular vote doesn't count because according to the Constitution, in Article 2, it's the Electoral College that chooses the president, right? And she's like, what are you talking about? So I took, the next, 45 minutes or something like that on a private call, and I basically just ran her through it real quickly, just in terms of describing it. And she was so flabbergasted, she was like, do you mind if I write this down? And she was typing it and all that so she could reference her notes. I was like, wow. And this same lady apparently was in the military. She swore, think about the cognitive impairment behind that. She literally swore an oath to defend and uphold the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, or whatever the rest of the oath says. But she didn't know, how her commander-in-chief got his job. I think I might be missing something over here. I was never in the military, and I don't ever plan on being, if I can all avoid it. But, yeah, just as a former homeschooler, I think I've got brains enough to figure out there's a problem here.
Yeah, and on top of that, someone that posts news on a regular basis, the top trending stories on Google have been about Hillary and the emails. They have made this the issue. Out of all the corruption, and I'm not for Hillary, the very fact that I even have to say that, it is really fundamentally sad when it comes down to it. For anyone that's been involved in research, there's so many criminals out there on high levels. So when you see Google of all sources, Hillary, email, criminal, FBI investigation, and then there is no investigation. We're only adds fuel to the fire, to the narrative that the establishment is solely behind Hillary. They bring out this whole criminal investigation, they make it the top story, and then she gets off. I mean, it's not really difficult. We're not exactly using advanced psychology, I don't think, to understand this. Seems like they've redirected from the real criminal stuff going on. They've made it a sideshow. And few people really want to look deeper at the Trump-Hillary connections, which we know are there. It's the Clinton Foundation. How do people shrug this off, Kyle? How do people shrug this off? Well, at least it's not Hillary. Who cares if they had dinner together? Who cares if there's pictures of them together? Who cares if Trump endorsed her years earlier when she was running for office or another seat somewhere else? Now, the logic that they're using is, I'm trying to understand that. That's some serious cognitive impairment. If they're going to give their faith, religious-like, to Donald Trump when they know about the corruption already in existence. So, I mean, am I supposed to ask deeper questions then? I mean, are there subliminals being used? Mind control. Obviously, we see the power of suggestion. Obviously, on a subtle level, we see how being an authority figure, take charge, make America again, like that base animal, like in 2016, apparently so. And so, yeah, well, to close this point, I don't think it's a trajectory up or down, people waking up or going to sleep. I think these things are cyclical. And right now, I don't think that we're in a time of a collective awakening. The things that we're seeing now and people apologizing for Trump and doing PR for Trump when Trump will do nothing for them, especially the off-gridders. I mean, that's like ultimate for an off-the-gridder who wants to be left alone to be supporting Donald Trump. So, yeah, clearly we've learned this in conclusion. All they have to do is create a candidate that nobody wants. And then there's going to be this bizarre psychology saying we can't vote for this candidate that's clearly playing the fool. We can only go in this direction. We have to choose between the lesser of two evils. Now that we're on this track, the question is, where do we go next?
Well, I think some potential solutions that might be better. You were mentioning the over reliance on technology. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I remember my mom back when I was homeschooled by her. I remember she would say okay, go off and go out for a walk outside. Get your big muscle activity was how she put it. And so I don't know, maybe some of the truthers or patriots or even the libertarians, maybe they should follow my mom's advice and get their big muscle activity and go at least for a walk outside and maybe not with an iPod, because I know a lot of people do that. But listen to the birds even, or look at the sky like it's still there. At least I think it is. So I mean, there's lots of different things that can be done. And you know what? Maybe minimizing exposure to the news cycle might be beneficial as well. I mean, people who have known me for a while, anything like the time, know that I read books more than I read news or watch news. In fact, I hardly have any news consumption. In fact, actually, some people, Alex, have kind of chided me in private conversations that I rely on them too much for the news cycle. They'll just tell me stuff they find interesting or perhaps important, and I'm like, yeah, I finished another book today, and I started another book when they ask me what I've been reading. So it's kind of like, well, I don't know, maybe some people should consider doing that, reading books more instead of 20,000 different articles that scare them about how the apocalypse is going to occur this week. Or if they are going to consume news, maybe they should be a little bit more discerning and double check and verify. And that's something else too people might consider is becoming their own citizen journalists and following up. I mean, that's how the alternative media in a lot of ways got started, was people were very skeptical of these mainstream media narratives. And so whether they were blogging or podcasting or something along those lines, they would go back and trace back the sources. And they would usually find a quite different narrative once they uncovered other facts that the mainstream reporters had not. So, and of course, you don't have to go it alone. People can collaboratively work together when they can find others who are, I would say, equally competent, and I would say probably more importantly, their intentions are to discover the truth wherever that may lead them. And so, that's what I would suggest is, get outside and be more skeptical.
I agree, and stay away from the junk food of the alternative media. I was thinking about the InfoWars branding, and the colors and and the G.I. Joe InfoWars T-shirt, and the tingy tangerine. So they could really market an InfoWars candy bar made from trace minerals from the Alex Jones septic system. Recycle for the InfoWars of today's new age that needs the Alex Jones spirit within. But yeah,
Electric Liberty, I think he called it.
Exactly. Now, there's also a phrase, don't blame the media, be the media. And another one could be, don't trust the media, participate in the media.
Yeah.
And so, not everybody's ready to go out and do that, but you know what? They should pursue the truth, and they should know what their truth is. And that's where I'd like to close. They should know what their truth is.
Yeah.
Where the information is coming from. Know how to figure something out, whether it's resonating as truth or not, and not just regurgitating cuts on a computer screen, because if you're in that state of and that mentality, you can be easily programmed. And in fact, people already are. So people should pursue their own deprogramming process. Do their own self-healing, self-work on a soul or a logical cognitive level, or really a combination of all the above. And that is a personal journey. And that's what I recommend to a lot of people that have been easily addicted and are maybe getting down on themselves, all the time they spend maybe listening to a certain person or following a certain thing. They need to continue to work on themselves and their own ability to align with their own compass of truth. And we'll leave it at that. Kyle, thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much, Alex.